Hello, and again, welcome to Bit Depth. I'm Santiago Ramones. Across from me is, you say your name.
Linda Owen.
Yeah. Hi, how are you?
Hi, Santiago.
So, first and foremost, how do we know each other?
I think the very first time I encountered you was as a fellow classmate in, and you may not remember this, in
I do remember that.
Dr. Hannon's class, the first time that he taught the history of video game music. And I was curious as to what that might be and sat in on it, and you were there as a member of the class too. But certainly we've gotten to know each other better as you've been studying piano with me in the last semester and a half or so.
Yeah. I think there might have been a time before then or somewhere around then. For one of my classes, I had to interview a professor. And I think it was for developmental psychology or something.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, that sounds kind of familiar.
Right, yeah. So it might have been for that, which was our first long-form interaction, yeah. Okay, so the first actual question, what do you do?
I teach piano, or I really like to think of it as I teach music with the piano as the medium for teaching music.
Has it always been piano?
Yes. There have been many other instruments and vocalists involved in music making with me over the years. But in terms of my specific teaching expertise, whatever that is, it's piano has been my specialty always.
Have you ever taught any other classes other than applied piano? Or
Yes, I have. I taught, when I first came to UCO, I taught class piano.
Okay.
As well as applied piano. My applied students, until the last couple of semesters, have always been what I'd term late elementary, early intermediate, mostly, meaning that they are more advanced than absolute beginners, where class piano might be their placement, but not advanced students,
Right.
not ever piano majors. I do have one piano major at the moment, but this is the first time in a long teaching career, and so it's kind of it's interesting and stimulating and fun to have that perspective added to my teaching load at this point.
Do you prefer teaching sort of more beginner pianists?
It never fails to give me a kick when I see a light bulb go on for somebody, or hear somebody, or see an expression on the face that this is something, a new idea, or that it's applying something new to maybe something that's already been studied, but from a little different perspective. So I guess that's a long way to say, yes, I really do enjoy teaching people who are becoming acquainted with music reading and musical forms and musical styles for the first time, or at an early point in their learning about music.
And have you do you think that because you teach beginner piano, is there a level of piano that you have to be at, or rather don't have to be at, for teaching beginner piano?
I think you're right, yes, that rightly or wrongly, I don't keep up my own skills to the level that they once were when I myself was a student, as a graduate student, and working on a master's, and then later in life working on doctoral degree, or even in my undergraduate work. Of course, I was a piano major, so I simply don't have or don't make the time to sit at the keyboard and be a really proficient pianist. And of course, I can play well enough to demonstrate things for my early level students, and I can do that without practicing. But I do like to have something that I'm working on with a performance in mind, because without that, it's really hard to keep yourself motivated to go to the piano, as you probably know. So I almost always have a duet partner, a piano duet partner that I'm working with on something, looking towards some upcoming performance. At the moment, for instance, my studio mate, Jennifer Mansour, and I are, I wish I could say polishing, although I guess we haven't really quite gotten to the point where polishing is what we're doing, but we are preparing 4 short pieces, 4 polonaises by Schubert that we will play for the Oklahoma City Pianist Club meeting in April. Both of us are members of that group.
So then, how long have you been teaching?
Gosh, all my life, which is a fairly long time by now. Probably over 60 years. In an informal sense, I guess I've really been teaching almost literally all of my life. My cousins remind me, and my brother, that when we were kids, we had a game called Go to the Head of the Class that involved game players who were students and one who was the teacher and asked questions. And I always wanted to be the teacher. So I guess there must be either something in my genes or my environment that has led me in that direction from as early as I can remember.
How does teaching, or rather, how is teaching different than just being a piano player? And then how is being a piano player, how does that contribute to teaching?
I think it would really be impossible. Well, maybe not impossible, but maybe it would be impossible. I'll have to ponder that idea. But what I was about to say, impossible to teach piano without having a certain level of skill of your own and a certain understanding of the process that you yourself went through in learning whatever level you did. In order to convey that to somebody else, you'd have experienced the difficulties and the satisfactions, and hopefully found some solutions that could make a shortcut for your students to arrive at a certain level of skill or a level of understanding. And that would be a part of your training and experience as a teacher to make you the most effective teacher, I think. So I think I don't know that you could teach somebody, maybe going completely outside the field of music, teach anybody anything if you really had not experienced it in some way or other yourself. I think it's possible, quite possible, for, speaking now again more specifically about music teaching, to make constructive comments and helpful advice, give helpful advice to someone whose actual performance level is higher than your own, but not without some background and level of skill yourself.
So then, what was your undergraduate degree and then your other degree as well?
I have a Bachelor of Arts degree. I went to a liberal arts college. That was an intentional decision on my part. And in this day and age, I think specialization is much more likely to be what we do. And the degrees here at UCO, for instance, that we offer are Bachelor of Music degree in either performance or music ed, music theater as well, which is an offshoot of the general field of music performance.
Mm-hmm.
But I really felt that I guess it was my own personal interest in so many different things that made me feel I wanted to study not just specifically music, although I very much love music and the study of music. But I felt a desire to have a broader scope on maybe the world than would be only in the field of music, and that maybe the musical expression and or teaching that I would be able to do would be informed by my knowledge of other areas of life, other areas of study, other disciplines.
Yeah.
So that was my undergraduate training. I went to a small private school. It's still in operation. It's one of the few places that still retains the name college, McAllister College in St. Paul, Minnesota. Got an undergraduate degree there, majoring in music, piano specifically, and I also got a major in English literature, just because I was interested in it. Then went directly to Indiana University, a great big school in Bloomington, Indiana, and got a master's degree in piano performance. Learned what I already suspected, that there were many, many people who were going to get a degree in piano performance, a master's degree, same as mine, who had a much greater level of skill in performing than I did. I didn't feel that I was bad, but certainly that there were many, many people for whom people would be willing to pay money to hear their performance, and I was not in that class myself.
Did you want to be?
I think probably not. As I've already said, I was really very happy with, very much enjoyed, found satisfaction in teaching, and performance as part of that package was important, but not something that I aspired to do exclusively. In fact, the thought of being a performer and not being a teacher at all makes me kind of sad. Always has. So I guess the teaching bug is a stronger one for me than the performance if I had to make a choice. Thankfully, I do not. It was quite a few years after I got my master's degree before I began work on what ended up being a program in leading to a PhD in music education and specifically piano pedagogy. I started on it rather, in a way, serendipitously or accidentally. Felt that taking some classes or a class in piano pedagogy and taking some piano lessons, both things that I had not done in many years, would be a good shot in the arm, so to speak, for giving a boost to my teaching. And it was 25 years probably, at least, after completing my first graduate degree before I began doing that. And then kind of got hooked into the excitement and stimulation of the collegiate environment, and just kept on and kept on and kept on. And then eventually it just so happened that the easier way to keep on was to be enrolled in a program that led toward the PhD. And so that's where 9 years later, continuing to be a very busy teacher and taking just a couple of courses or lessons at a time, I completed that degree too. As an old lady, or at least a middle-aged person.
How do you think achieving a PhD changed how you taught?
One thing for sure is that it gave me a confidence in myself that I think was a higher level of confidence than I had had before. Not that I felt really insecure, although having said that, it reminds me that, especially recently, I guess I'm more and more aware of how much I don't know, as well as how much I perhaps do know. But the confidence level, I think, was certainly an important part of what I gained from the doctoral study. But all kinds of new ideas had come about in that long period of time during which I was teaching and not myself studying. There were lots of developments in the field of music and in the field of teaching that I could learn about and that I hope and I believe made me a better, more effective teacher as I continued on. Just one rather obvious example is that when I graduated from my undergraduate studies, as far as I knew or had ever heard of, there wasn't such a field described as piano pedagogy. And now there are piano pedagogy programs. Even 25 years ago, when I began working on my doctoral studies, piano pedagogy had become a field of study that was separate from the more generalized study of music that was in place at the time that I began my undergraduate studies. And so had I wanted to, well, no, I did know that I wanted to be a teacher even when I began my undergraduate work, but there wasn't a specific degree program such as there exists today that has that title and that specific aim for its students. Piano pedagogy is a new creation, a new invention in the academic world since the time that I began.
Right. Well, I mean, that and like you were mentioning, that there were other pianists that were definitely focused on performance, and that it is important to have a distinction between, yes, playing the piano and getting a degree in it so that you can teach, versus getting a piano degree so that you can perform as a performer. So going all the way back, when did you start playing piano?
I was about 6 years old. I was told that at a little later time that I begged for piano lessons for several years before my parents felt that I was old enough to maybe to really know whether I wanted it, or maybe they wanted to make sure that I was serious enough about it if I kept asking for it, that I really did want it. But they were always very supportive of me. But there was a piano in our home, and my mother and my grandmother, who also lived there, both played the piano. And both of them told me later on that they soon stopped playing the piano after I began taking piano lessons because they felt that they weren't as good as I was. But my recollection was that I thought what they did was really neat, really, or as we would say today, really cool. And it was something that I really aspired to do too. I admired what they could do and enjoyed it and thought it looked like fun, and so I wanted to be like them. They were my role models.
So then what inspired you to continue doing piano? How did you make the decision to make piano and teaching your vocation rather than, I don't know, a real job, as other people might say?
I guess it just, for the most part, it never really seemed to leave my my awareness. My mind was always focused in that direction. It seemed like almost inevitable, I would say.
Right.
I considered other avenues of music. At one time, I was thinking church music would be my direction of applying whatever skills and knowledge I had in the field. But that kind of went by the wayside. It didn't seem as if that was, in particular, it didn't seem as if piano was something that would fit in with that. And teaching at the college level always appealed to me. And that is, in fact, where most of my teaching has been done, although I did begin teaching in the public school at the elementary level. My very first paid job as a teacher was at that level, and I certainly enjoyed those youngsters that I worked with for those 6 or 7 years.
Right. Do you still remember them and still know them?
It was long enough ago that I have no contact with any of those people, and it was in a far distant state as well.
Right.
But yes, I certainly remember individuals and general ideas, general recollections about the things that we did. My music teacher colleagues, a few of them I have kept in touch with, and in particular, the mentor teacher that I respected so much when I first began teaching, and I still have contact with her.
Would you recommend that every parent have their child play piano or try to learn piano?
Oh, I think it'd be great. How could I answer otherwise, Santiago? Yes, I think it's an enriching and fulfilling thing to do, and whether or not I think it enriches the human being that participates in music making. And that sounds sort of trite or maybe like a cliche, but I really do believe that, and that's been my experience with it. I'm right now teaching. In fact, just before your lesson, always I have a group of adults in their 50s and 60s who are recreational music makers, and they are people who are a couple of years ago when they started with me as a group, 4 of them, they were either absolute beginners or had piano a long time ago when they were kids, and not for very long. And as far as they were concerned, they had basically forgotten anything that they knew at the time, and they were starting from scratch, wanted to start from scratch. And we're still having a great time.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell, they are, and I certainly am,
Right.
Making music. So that's a long way to answer your question, I guess, but anybody's life is enriched by studying music, and I think particularly the piano, because it's an instrument where you can make the music all by yourself or with somebody else, but you don't have to have anyone else to do it and come up with a potentially satisfying result.
That actually is some form of answer to the next question I was going to ask. What is it about the piano that makes it unique and important to music teaching that makes it different from teaching voice or any other instrument?
You're right. What I said about being able to make music all by yourself, that is a complete package, so to speak, with the low and the high pitches and all that goes in between, all available to you as a single person, but you can add to that one or many colleagues to make music with you. But another thing that makes the piano really basic, and why I hope that our students understand that always, why every music major is required to study piano, whereas every music major is not required to study the trumpet or the flute or voice. Why is it that we require everyone to study the piano? Well, the piano provides a visual and tactile reference to musical notation, unless you really don't care at all about being musically literate, that is, being able to read music. The piano provides that visual access to the meaning of musical symbols that we refer to in learning a new piece of music that none of the other instruments does.
Right.
We have black and white keys that are spread out over a distance, a space in actual physical space, comparing it to, I suppose, the most different instrument is the voice, where it's contained within the human body, and the piano is completely opposite, really,
Right.
in the way that the music is produced. And the feeling of distances and spaces, that we study, that I emphasize thinking about the musical notation in intervals and then feeling those intervals under your hand across the keyboard. All of those things make the visual aid of the piano an important aid in learning the basics of music and then continuing on from there to learn at a more complex level.
Right. What's your favorite instrument outside of the piano?
Oh, that's hard to say. If it's well done, any instrument, including the voice, is wonderful. But I do really relish hearing string quartets, and I relish the sound of the brass section of an orchestra. How can I leave out the woodwinds and the percussion and the singers? Those are just some things that I particularly enjoy, but it's really hard to say one is my most favorite of all. I did play violin and viola when I was a kid and on into college and graduate school even, and played the clarinet for a short time and the bassoon, and have at one point in my life spent quite a lot of time playing recorders, the old instruments. So,
or now the elementary instruments.
That too, yes. Yeah, there's been a surge in interest in historical performance. And, of course, here at UCO we have a Center for Historical Performance, as you know, where recorders are part of the game. And that was something that I was interested in and did practice for a time. So it's pretty hard for me to nail down a particular favorite.
Right. Do you compose music?
That's something I've never had any natural inclination to do, it seems. Strangely enough, I wasn't required to take a composition class as an undergraduate or even in my master's study, but I guess I felt that I ought to at least experience that in a kind of, you might say, an academic way, taking it as a class. And so as an elective, after I'd completed my master's, the summer after I completed my master's, I signed up for a class with a composer in Minnesota where I was living at the time, and did take composition lessons and found it very difficult and challenging. There just weren't melodies and harmonies and rhythms in my head that were my own invention. There were lots that stayed there from other composers' music, but it wasn't something that I seemed to be able to come up with, especially in the way that it appeared other people were doing. Where does the melody come from? Where does the harmony come from for you as a composer? And although I know this is supposed to be my interview, I'm always interested in that from the point of view of somebody who does that and finds it to be maybe a natural form of expression.
I think in a way, it's far simpler than thinking of it as, trying to make something new or trying to formulate something that hasn't been done before. It's really just I make it up,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously it's impossible to make something entirely original, but to get hung up on the idea that, oh, this has probably been done before, is not it's not the point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so to create something to express oneself, or even just to experiment with an idea
Mm-hmm.
and how it can musically come across, that's sort of more the point. Exploring as an art, and expressing, whether it be my own feelings or just ideas. Yeah, just make it up. It's simple.
Manipulating the materials. Yeah. And when the assignment with this adventure in taking a composition class, when the assignment was to make up a melody, well, okay, how do you do that? It just, to someone like yourself, I think it just happens in your mind somehow. And what do you do when it doesn't just happen in your mind? How do you come up with something? I'm not sure.
Just scales and such, all concepts that aren't foreign to any musician, but how can you apply a scale and pick notes within that scale in a certain order? It doesn't really matter. But just you take a series of tools and what is at your disposal and go, well, if I have to make a melody, maybe it has to be in a key, maybe it has to use a certain mode, maybe it has to. And so you get certain parameters that allow you to work within a space, or else.
So in a way, you set your own limits or boundaries,
Right.
and then you work within those. And
Yeah.
they may be more broad sometimes and much more restricted on other occasions.
Right. And a sandbox is not necessarily conducive to the best creativity, even when posed with a sandbox. A lot of creative people will set their own limitations in order to be creative, because having infinite possibilities really isn't conducive to making anything, because
There are too many things to choose from.
Right.
Yeah.
What was my next? Okay. A rather broad question. What is the importance of music?
Wow. A broad question indeed. Communication of one human being to another, or to a group of others, in a form different from any other. We communicate in various kinds of ways, and that's certainly one of them. But I'd say it is a form of communication.
And it's certainly unique.
It is unique.
And I've thought about this a lot. How what makes music unique from other art forms? For one, it's temporal. So how is the concept of time important to music?
Well, music has a beginning and an end. Not sure. It's kind of an open-ended question.
Right. Well,
Yeah. And intentionally, of course, I'm sure. But you sure that was on my list?
it wasn't. I'm sorry.
No, I'm teasing. But it's an interesting thing to ponder. It's, even when it's captured on a recording, which we can now do that people hundreds of years ago could not, there's still a beginning and an end. And thinking about a piece of visual art, for instance, some of the things that I'm seeing around this room,
Right.
it's, once it's created and the creator decides that it's finished, it's there for anyone to see at any time. Music has to be recreated again and again if it's going to be shared.
Right.
So I guess the what's a word for it? The elusive nature of music is something that differentiates it from visual art, for sure. It happens over a period of time, and once it's happened, it'll never happen again in exactly the same way. And then I suppose you could say, well, there's a recording of it, so then it's going to be exactly the same. And I guess maybe that's true, but you still have to activate that recording.
That, and then the recording is only a shade of the original sound, the original vibrations that occurred. Whenever stuff goes through a microphone, it is altered. Whenever it goes through the thing that makes it louder, it's altered again. Whenever it goes, it's, at least right now, it's being converted into zeros and ones into a computer, and so that's being altered again. And so in a way, even still, if you record any piece of music, it's still never going to be heard the same way again, because that is what was happening at that moment. And so the recording just resembles the original creation.
It's a reasonable facsimile of the original. And of course, the sound will be determined by a number of factors: the equipment on which it was recorded, the equipment on which it is played back, the room in which you're hearing it, the room in which it was performed. All of those are different each time that it's going to be heard. And even if for example, I listen to a recording that I like now and I listened to it a week ago, then I'm different. My ears have gotten older, for example, and, well, probably all kinds of factors that
you experience
that I'm not thinking about right this minute, but maybe even the mood that I'm in. That's certainly true now that I say it. One of the most stunning, for me, stunning memories is hearing the Sibelius Second Symphony played by the Cleveland Orchestra under a legendary conductor, George Schulte. And why that particular time that I heard that particular piece, I believe it was probably the first time that I heard it. It's a long time ago. But I can't sing you every single note or motif in that symphony, but it was just something that made an enormous impression on me at the time, and still now I look forward to the possibility of hearing that that piece with great anticipation, and our Oklahoma City Philharmonic played that piece just a month or two ago, and I was very excited to hear it, and it was a wonderful experience. Again,
Yeah.
something that I wonder, why did that particular piece at that particular time in my life and that particular occasion impress me so strongly? I couldn't tell you, but it did, and continues to do so.
So, in a way, the importance of music, we don't really know, but it is.
It would be a very bleak life without it. It's hard even to imagine.
Given your experience in teaching over the years, what is something that you've found yourself telling students over and over again? Both different students, but also the same students telling them the same thing.
Oh, there are probably quite a few things. The immediate thing that came to my mind was be patient with yourself. I think more than, as I consider your question, the hardest thing is the belief that something is that perfection is possible. And that belief underlies the nervousness that many people experience when they perform, or even when they come to take a lesson, that they're not going to be perfect. And so I find myself regularly saying, don't try to be perfect. And the first time I say that to any given person, usually they look startled. What do you mean, don't try to be perfect? That sounds like just the opposite of what you should be telling me. But perfection is not going to be achievable, and then we are likely to discuss that for a minute. And the student will say, well, yes, I'm a human being, and we know human beings are not perfect. So the idea that I might produce a perfect performance is not going to happen. But then still I'm expecting that of myself, and when it doesn't happen, I'm disappointed. So there's a built-in contradiction and a built-in determination that you will be disappointed if your expectation is that, what I'm going to term unrealistic one, that you're going to practice so hard that you're going to be perfect, you're going to play perfectly, or you're going to sing perfectly. It won't happen. So let's instead plan to do our very best and plan how we will overcome the imperfections that we know will happen. And the achievement of the carrying on in spite of the imperfections will be one of the beauties and unique elements of that very performance. And the same mistakes won't happen each time, although some of them will maddeningly come back again and again. But each performance will be, however slightly different from all the others, because your encountering of difficulty, unexpected or expected, and how you overcome it, how you carry on beyond it, is what will make that performance unique.
It's interesting that is one of the things that you tell students more often, because much less so is that a musical instruction than it is a life instruction to,
I guess so.
Try not to be perfect, but to do your best. That as mistakes continue to happen, you try your best to overcome them, which, applicable to music, but also applicable to everywhere else.
Life in general, I think so. Rising above circumstances is something that we tend to admire and highlight in the lives of people who have overcome great adversity, and in a much smaller way, what I've just said is a representation of that phenomenon. Carrying forward in life is that way.
What is an interest of yours that others may not know about? Outside of music, obviously.
I really like watching Thunder basketball. Although if you know me for any length of time, you might discover that that's the case. And I'm very interested in movies. I really like people, meeting different people, people from all walks of life and people who come from other locations, other countries. I don't know whether those are things that people know about me or not.
Well, you also mentioned how your undergrad also had a focus in English literature. So what is the literature that you tend to focus on or keep coming back to, or that you particularly enjoy?
I like to read, but I read slowly, and I'd say relatively infrequently do I spend any long period of time. I keep books and periodicals right by the toilet so that where I know I'm going to spend a little time each day,
Sure.
I have something that I may pick up and look at there. But nonfiction seems to be what always gets to me, much more likely than fiction, although certain fiction works will grab my attention too, and then that's often rather surprising. I really enjoyed the Harry Potter series, but haven't read them all, have seen all the movies. But that is fiction that I enjoyed. But I guess reading memoirs or historical accounts about real people and real events seems to be much more attractive and appealing to me in reading than something that is fictional. But just very recently I got caught so that I really literally could not lay down a very interesting story that was fictional, and absolutely stayed up practically all night to finish the story. I guess it was evidence of the great skill of that author to paint a very realistic set of characters.
Switching gears into probably the less comfortable questions. What is the role of spirituality or religion in your life?
For a long part of my life, as long as I can remember, as early as I can remember, and through to middle age, I was very active in conventional, established religious institution. And in the more recent part of my life, I'm completely separated from any established traditional religious institution. I think that does not mean that I don't have a spiritual life, but it's not in an organized institutional form.
Sure.
Do I believe in God? I'm not sure. I'm at the point where I'd say I'm what I would call an agnostic, one who is not sure. one who doesn't know, is there a spiritual being, something that might be called God? I don't know. My own personal experience does not lead me to the kind of moment that I can pinpoint as this is when I experienced God. And there are certainly a number of people I have known, know, who can point to such a time. But I cannot. And after a certain point, the teachings of the organized religion, the denominational religions that I've been acquainted with, didn't make sense. They didn't seem to fit with what I was being told was what God was like. My experiences and what I was being taught didn't mesh. And so participating in the religious services of a traditional denomination, it wasn't meaningful, and was in fact disturbing because it wasn't meaningful, I guess. Didn't fit with my own experiences, and so I felt it was I was living a lie, or I was behaving in a deceitful way if I practiced in any way the religious traditions that I had to that point been practicing. Just didn't seem that it was honest. So I stopped doing it. Over a relatively short period of time, I suppose, I kind of weaned myself away from it, feeling guilty, uncomfortable, unfamiliar with the territory that I was entering, but eventually feeling that that was really the only way that I could continue.
Was it just any particular experience, or was it just over time that you sort of gathered the information and made a decision?
Certainly over time, because I was a part of institutional religion for a good number of years, on into my 40s, and so it wasn't something that I'd experienced so briefly that I think I could just drop it like a hot potato. It was actually, I think, kind of painful, and in a way of speaking, had withdrawal symptoms as I was weaning myself from something that had been a part of my life and experience for such a long time. But it seemed the only way that I could feel I was being honest with myself. And so that's where I've ended up. I couldn't ever get to the point where I would say, I do not believe that there is a God. And I know too many people who seem to be smart people and honest people who have had experiences that are different from my own, where this is a very meaningful thing to them. And I couldn't be respectful of my fellow human beings who say that this has been their experience and deny that for them, even if I choose this path for myself.
How do you still experience spirituality now that you don't take part in a sort of institutional, organized fashion of spirituality?
I think that there's how to express it is maybe a little more difficult than just how I experience it, but I guess there's and this sounds kind of corny as I'm thinking it and as I'm about to say it, but I think there's a spark of divinity in every human being that connects us with one another. And this this is what I experience. Wow, it makes me kind of emotional as I am thinking about this and then speaking the words to you. But that connection with another human being is what I'd say is the spirituality that I experience at this point in my life. With most human beings that I do encounter, it's a very good thing. And even with people that I disagree with very strongly on certain topics, perhaps, there's a connection, a human connection that I think is undeniable. There's a worthiness to that other individual that I believe is in myself and that I therefore must acknowledge in that other person. A value to that humanity.
Yeah. Do you experience that connection through music? Especially through music, rather.
Yes, I think I can quickly say yes to that question. It's a specific kind of experience. Having a conversation such as we're doing now is a connection that you and I can experience. Making music together, if we sit and play a duet, or if you play and I listen, or I play and you listen, that's a particular kind of connection, but not the only one, but a very important one I would not want ever to be without completely.
Right. And I mean, obviously, you've made it such an important part of your life that you've continued to do so.
Right.
So then you already answered the God question. Do you believe in free will? And I guess you might also need to define your definition of free will.
Well, that's interesting. The denomination in which I grew up and probably would still claim if I did participate in an organized religion is Presbyterian, and there is a sort of a perception, I would say, in the denomination itself and by people outside that denomination that there's a belief that there isn't free will, that we are predestined is usually the word, by something outside our own power to be a certain way or to end up in a certain place, to behave a certain way. And that just is outside my experience. I can't agree with that. I think that we have choices that we can make about whatever happens to us in our lives. And whatever we choose then will determine what happens next to some degree. And there are things that are, many, many things that are outside our control that will affect our lives. But the only thing that we can do is react. And I think that we have the freedom to do that. And if that seems like not very much freedom, then I guess that's then that's true.
Sure.
That is what my experience leads me to conclude, that yes, we can always make choices. Some are harder to make than others, and some seem inevitable, and maybe I'm mistaken too.
And speaking of those choices, what does it mean to make good choices or to be a good person?
Being kind, I think that's tops. I've experienced a few people in my life who are what seem to me unkind, and many people who are very kind or who have many moments of kindness. And that seems, I guess, like the top thing that makes somebody be a good person is to exhibit kindness towards oneself, but certainly toward other people.
How does one be kind?
Well, here's where you could pull up a standard from organized religion, the golden rule: treat other people the way you'd like to be treated yourself. What would feel good to you if you did it to somebody else is what you would like to experience if they were treating you in a similar way. That's how to be kind.
Right. Do you think that people are predisposed to be bad or good, or neither?
I read that question on the list of questions you provided for me, and I kind of went back and forth, but I think I just have to go with the idea that people are inclined toward good at some level in their nature, and that if they turn out to be what seems to be a bad person, that it's gone against their innate self somehow. How exactly that happens for any person or group of people, I couldn't say.
Yeah.
But I'm going to have to vote for the goodness being the way people are.
How have the values of our culture changed throughout your life? And if they've changed at all, actually.
Oh, yes, I'm sure they have. Certainly the way people behave is always changing, I guess, and what's acceptable in society. I imagine you could look back through history, and at any period of time you would see changes. But an interesting nonfiction book that I'm currently struggling to read has an interesting title, Thank You for Being Late, but its basic premise is the rapidity of change that's occurring in this modern time, and how difficult it is for human beings to adjust to that, because the rate of change is so great. Attitudes and behaviors because of them are changing, and then the technology that is such a part of our world now is so. One thing builds on another, so that you're never going backwards to start over again. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, as they say. And that's always been true, but the technology developments are accessible to everybody in the world now. And so everybody can use what everybody else has developed to propel them forward to whatever they're going to develop in such a way that the rate of change is just exponential is the word that the author keeps using, and it's just amazing and unfathomable, really, to imagine where it's going to be in just a very short time. I'm not sure that that's really a direct answer to your question, but we could pull out any number of examples of behaviors that are different now from what they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago?
I guess for myself, I'm more interested in values. How, at least from my perception, that modern culture, at least in America, is so self focused, self valuing that people seem to have little interest in caring for one another, at least in the general sense. And so I wonder if we've gotten more selfish as a society, at least in America, or maybe if it's always been this way, or we've actually gotten less selfish. I don't know.
Well, I'll have to start out by saying I don't know either, but certainly in our America, which is the only place where I have ever lived for any period of time, there is a sense of entitlement. Whatever I can get for myself is what I'm entitled to, and that's going to be the focus of my activity, is to see how good I can make things for myself. Maybe this is putting a lie to what I just said a short time ago about people being really at their core, that they're really good. Maybe not.
Well, I think there's a comparison between the two, though, because it's more about how we as a culture have sort of pressured each other, or the zeitgeist, if you will, has influenced that predisposition. And so if you feel as though, yeah, maybe we have a predisposition for being good, but the culture itself is sort of pushing in the other direction.
But what is the culture other than the collective activity of those individuals?
In a way, the parameters in place by which we interact and by which we can make decisions. For example, that the values that a person in a culture that encourages a free market might be different from those in a culture that encourages taking care of your fellow man. And in that way, comparing the influence that culture has in America versus what it is in Sweden, that sort of perception or zeitgeist influences the way that we interact and make decisions, or spend our money even. And that is something that, I have thought about lately, especially given the political climate. But since I am so affected by it, and so that's kind of something that I wonder about, if people have gotten more selfish as the culture has changed over time.
It certainly seems like it. Would be my immediate reaction. The people who are in power and therefore are having the greatest influence on the direction that our country is taking are, to my perception, very, very self-centered and unconcerned with anything but themselves, and themselves at the expense of anyone else
Right.
is their mode of operating.
Mm-hmm.
And the possibility exists that that will push a larger number of people to react against that if they find that appalling or at least not appealing. And maybe it will activate people who have otherwise been complacent into taking action to fulfill what I have earlier said I thought was our nature, to be concerned about other people. But I always have to make a disclaimer that I could be wrong.
Right. How would we sort of inject more positivity in our culture?
Well, there's no doubt that we must begin where we are. I'm one person. I can have hopefully some influence over my own behavior, and beyond that, I may be able to influence other people because of what I do, but that's where I have to begin. If I think being kind, as I earlier stated, is so important, then it's pretty darn important that I make every effort to do that myself, to behave that way myself.
Yeah.
And then hope that that will influence anyone I come in contact with to be that way too.
Yeah. Last question. What advice do you have for people?
Be kind. Make music. I'm not sure that it seems rather arrogant to think, I guess, that I'd be in a position to advise all people. But my experience leads me to say what I just did, that if we can live our lives aiming to be kind, that would be a worthy goal for anybody.
Yeah. Well, lucky for you, all people do not listen to this podcast, and so you're only giving advice to some people. Dr. Owen, thank you for doing this with me.
It's a pleasure, Santiago. I'm honored that you asked me to join you and talk.
It's obviously not often that I get to have someone of your experience and of your expertise on the podcast, and so I'm glad to have you.
Thank you.
This is usually the part where people plug the things that they're doing either on the internet or in the public sphere. So where can we support you or find your things so that we can encourage people to act in favor of you?
I could most easily be contacted through UCO, and the website is uco.edu, and my name is Linda Owen. If you were to find the UCO website and use the search to find my name, that would be the easiest way to make contact. Unless you want me to give a phone number, and I can do that,
no,
but I don't think that's probably not what you were after.
And then are there any public performances that you'd like people to come to and show support either of your performing or other people that you'd like to support?
I personally have no public performances coming up, but there are probably hundreds of performances that happen throughout a school year at UCO alone.
Right.
And I think it's wonderful to support the students who are doing them and the faculty and staff members who make musical presentations. And not only is it wonderful to support them, but it's a win-win situation because
Right.
you can enjoy and experience all kinds of great music and interesting stuff that you may never have heard before or heard of before. So lots of good stuff going on.
Yeah.
Just check the UCO website for that too.
Yeah.
Find the calendar.
All right. Well, thank you. Once again, I'm Santiago Ramones.
And I'm Linda Owen.
And this is the part where I have to plug all of my things, so forgive my very long spiel. You can find all the things that I do on my website, santiagoramones.com. I make music as well as this podcast. You can leave reviews on the app or whatever it is that you use to listen to this podcast. You can leave a comment. You can let me know what you think about the conversations that I've had. But you can also listen to music that I've made that is also on my website. You can download or pay for music that I have on my Bandcamp. And I am preparing other performances. I think by the time that this podcast goes up, I will have performed on March 16th. So that will be too late to announce that. But perhaps not too late to announce that I will be performing at Metro Music Fest, which is on April 6th. And then I'll probably provide more details for that as that becomes closer. I always end my podcast with my 3 things. They shape my life philosophy. Those 3 things are: love never fails, it's going to be okay, I might be wrong.